Every Tuesday at exactly 2 p.m., Marcus Chen walked through the iron gates of Riverside Park carrying his expensive leather briefcase and a wooden chess set that had seen better days. Today was no different, except for the slight spring in his step as he approached the usual bench where Harold Blackwood, the 82-year-old millionaire, sat waiting. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees, sending leaves dancing around their feet as Marcus set up the chess pieces with practiced care. Harold watched with kind eyes, his wrinkled hands folded neatly in his lap. Few people knew that the elderly man in the worn tweed jacket was worth over $50 million. That's exactly how Harold liked it. Beautiful day for chess, isn't it? Marcus said, adjusting his silk tie. At 35, he looked every bit the successful financial advisor he claimed to be. His carefully pressed suit and polished shoes spoke of attention to detail. What they didn't reveal was the mountain of debt hiding behind his professional facade, or the desperate plan forming in his mind. Not far from their bench, behind a large oak tree, sat 10-year-old Tommy Parker. The boy had discovered this quiet spot 3 months ago when trying to avoid the noisy playground after school. With his backpack full of comic books and a peanut butter sandwich his mom always packed, Tommy had made this his secret reading spot. From here, you could see the strange pair who play chess every week. Harold moved his first pawn, his arthritis-stiffened fingers trembling slightly. You know, Marcus, I've come to look forward to these games more than anything else in my week. The old man's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. It's not often I find someone willing to listen to an old man's stories. Marcus nodded, hiding his impatience behind a practiced smile. For 6 months, he had listened to Harold's tales of his late wife Martha, stories about building his real estate empire from nothing, and endless advice about life. Each story was another brick in the foundation of trust Marcus was carefully building. Tommy watched them from his hiding spot, munching on his sandwich. He didn't understand the game they played, but he liked making up stories about them in his head. The old man reminded him of his grandfather, who lived far away in Florida. The younger man looked like the business people he saw rushing around downtown, always checking their phones and wearing fancy suits. As their game progressed, Marcus skillfully let Harold win, just as he had done most weeks. Your strategy is improving, Harold chuckled, taking Marcus as queen. Martha would have liked you, my boy. She always said I needed more friends. The mention of Martha made Marcus lean forward with calculated interest. You must miss her terribly, he said, watching Harold's face carefully. Every detail about Harold's late wife was another tool in Marcus's arsenal, another way to seem caring and trustworthy. What Marcus didn't know was that Tommy had started keeping a diary about the chess players. In his Spider-Man notebook, he wrote down what they wore, what time they came, and sometimes drew pictures of their games. He had even given them nicknames: Grandpa Chess and Mr. Suit. As the afternoon sun began to dip, Harold packed away his chess pieces into a velvet bag. Same time next week? He asked, his voice hopeful. Marcus helped him stand, supporting the older man's elbow with gentle care that looked natural to any observer. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Marcus replied, his mind already calculating how many more of these meetings it would take. His research had shown that Harold had no living relatives, no close friends except the acquaintances at his country club. The old man was a perfect target, wealthy, lonely, and trusting. Tommy watched them leave, as he did every Tuesday. Mr. Suit always walked Grandpa Chess to the park entrance, carrying his chess bag. Today, Tommy noticed Mr. Suit checking his phone a lot, something that seemed odd to the observant boy. As darkness began to creep into the park, Tommy packed up his own belongings. His mom would be wondering where he was soon. Before leaving, he wrote in his notebook, Tuesday, they played chess again. Mr. Suit lost but didn't look sad. Grandpa Chess told more stories about someone called Martha. None of them, not Marcus with his cruel plans, not Harold with his lonely wealth, nor Tommy with his innocent observations, knew that their Tuesday meetings were about to become part of something much darker. The chess games were just the beginning, pieces being moved into place for a game where the stakes were far higher than any of them realized. The morning sun hit the windows of Marcus Chen's office as he reviewed Harold Blackwood's investment portfolio for the 100th time. 6 months of careful planning, of playing chess, of listening to endless stories about Martha. It was all about to pay off. His computer screen showed Harold's account balance: $54,782,940. Marcus's hands shook slightly as he imagined having access to even a fraction of that money. His phone buzzed. Harold's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, my boy," the old man's voice crackled through the speaker. "Could we meet at the park today? I have something important to discuss." Marcus checked his watch. 10 a.m., unusual for Harold to request a meeting outside their regular Tuesday sessions. "Of course, Harold. Is everything all right?" "Oh, yes. Wonderful, actually. I've made a big decision, and you're the first person I want to tell." Those words made Marcus smile. Finally, he thought, all his work was paying off. He grabbed his coat and chess set, though he doubted they'd be playing today. This felt bigger. At the same time, in Ms. Robertson's fifth-grade class, Tommy Parker was having trouble focusing on his math problems. His mind kept wandering to his secret spot in the park, where he could read his comics in peace. The classroom felt too noisy, too crowded. When the lunch bell rang, he decided to skip the cafeteria and head to the park instead. Harold was already at their usual bench when Marcus arrived. The old man looked different today, energetic, almost younger somehow. He patted the space next to him with a wrinkled hand. "Marcus, you've become like a son to me these past months," Harold began, his voice warm with emotion. "That's why I wanted you to be the first to know. I've made a decision about my legacy." Marcus's heart raced. This was it. All those chess games, all those stories about Martha, all that careful planning. It was all about to be worth it. He kept his face neutral, interested but not too eager. "I've decided to donate my entire fortune to St. Mary's Children's Hospital," Harold announced proudly. "They're going to build a new wing for cancer research. Can you imagine? My money helping sick children for generations to come." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt the blood drain from his face, but forced himself to keep smiling. That's wonderful news, Harold," he managed to say, though his mouth had gone dry. Tommy, who had settled into his usual spot behind the oak tree with his lunch, noticed the two men weren't playing chess today. Mr. Suit looked different. His face was pale, and his hands were tight fists in his lap. Tommy took out his Spider-Man notebook and wrote, "Thursday, no chess today. Mr. Suit looks sick." "I want you to help me set it up," Harold continued, oblivious to Marcus's distress. "We can start transferring the funds next week. Martha always wanted us to have children, you know. This feels like the right thing to do." Marcus nodded mechanically, his mind racing. 6 months of work gone. His debts wouldn't wait. The loan sharks certainly wouldn't understand that his perfect plan had been ruined by a children's hospital. "Would you meet me here tonight?" Marcus heard himself asking. "After dinner. We can discuss the investment strategy for the hospital fund." Harold beamed. "Of course, though I'm not sure why we can't discuss it now." "I have some research to do first," Marcus said quickly. "To make sure we handle this properly, let's say 8 p.m.? Tommy perked up at this. 8 o'clock? The park was closed after dark. His mom never let him stay out past 6:30. He wrote in his notebook, "Mr. Suit and Grandpa Chess are meeting at night." Weird. As Harold agreed to the evening meeting, Marcus's mind was already forming a new plan. The old stone bridge at the far end of the park would be deserted at that hour. One simple push, and all his problems would be solved. It would look like an accident, an elderly man losing his balance in the dark. What Marcus didn't know was that Tommy had already decided to sneak out after dinner. He had never been in the park after dark, and his curiosity was stronger than his fear of getting in trouble. As both Marcus and Tommy walked home that afternoon, they were each planning their secret return to the park, one driven by desperate greed, the other by innocent curiosity. Neither realized that their decisions would change their lives forever. Darkness fell over Riverside Park like a heavy blanket. The street lamps cast long shadows across the empty paths, their light barely reaching the old stone bridge at the park's far end. Tommy Parker huddled behind his familiar oak tree, clutching his Spider-Man backpack to his chest. He had never seen the park so empty, so different from its daytime self. Getting out of the house hadn't been easy. He had pretended to go to bed early, stuffing pillows under his blanket like he'd seen in movies. His parents were watching TV downstairs, unaware that their son had climbed down the old maple tree outside his window. At 7:55 p.m., Marcus Chen's black car pulled into the parking lot. Tommy recognized his shiny shoes clicking against the pavement. Mr. Suit looked different in the dark, taller somehow, his shoulders stiff as he walked toward the park entrance. He kept checking his phone and looking over his shoulder. 5 minutes later, Harold appeared, walking slowly with his cane. Tommy wanted to warn Grandpa Chess that something felt wrong. Mr. Suit wasn't carrying the chess set today, and he was wearing dark clothes instead of his usual bright suits. "Harold, over here," Marcus called out, his voice echoing strangely in the empty park. Harold smiled and made his way toward him, trust visible in every step. "I thought we could walk while we talk about the hospital plans." Tommy watched them move away from the main path toward the bridge. He had never gone that far into the park at night. His heart beat faster as he made a decision. He would follow them, staying in the shadows like the superheroes in his comics. The old stone bridge loomed ahead, its ancient rocks dark against the night sky. The river below was black and silent. Marcus led Harold to the middle of the bridge, positioning him near the waist-high stone railing. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Harold said, looking up at the stars. "Martha and I used to walk here in the evenings, you know. She loved watching the moonlight on the water." Tommy crept closer, hiding behind a large bush near the bridge's entrance. He could see both men clearly now. Mr. Suit was standing very close to Grandpa Chess, but his face looked strange, hard and angry, not friendly like during their chess games. "Tell me more about the hospital plans," Marcus said, his voice tight. He moved slightly behind Harold, who was still gazing at the water below. "Well, I thought we could start with the cancer ward. So many children need." Harold's words cut off suddenly as Marcus's hands shot forward, gripping the old man's shoulders. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but his body wouldn't move. He watched in horror as Mr. Suit pushed Grandpa Chess toward the railing. "My money," Marcus growled, his voice completely different now. "It was supposed to be mine. All those months of chess games, listening to your stupid stories about Martha, it was all for nothing." Harold's eyes widened with understanding. He tried to turn, to fight back, but his cane clattered to the stone bridge. "Marcus, please." The sound of the splash seemed to echo forever in Tommy's ears. He watched Grandpa Chess disappear over the railing, heard the horrible sound of something hitting the water far below. His hands shook as he gripped his backpack tighter, tears streaming down his face. Marcus stood at the railing for a long moment, looking down at the dark water. His breathing was heavy, visible in the cold night air. Then, as if switching on a mask, his face changed. He straightened his jacket, picked up Harold's fallen cane, and walked calmly back toward the park entrance. Tommy stayed frozen behind the bush until Mr. Suit's footsteps faded away. His legs felt weak, and his stomach hurt. This wasn't like his comic books. There had been no superhero to save the day. No Spider-Man had swung in to catch Grandpa Chess. When he finally found the strength to move, Tommy ran home faster than he had ever run before. He scraped his hands climbing back up the maple tree, but he barely felt it. Inside his room, he buried himself under his blankets, still in his clothes, shaking with fear and shock. The park's night silence was broken only by the gentle sound of the river flowing beneath the old stone bridge, carrying its dark secret into the darkness. The morning after the bridge incident, Marcus Chen followed his normal routine with mechanical precision. He made coffee, ironed his shirt, and checked the morning news on his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the local headlines. Nothing yet about Harold. After leaving the park last night, he had carefully executed his alibi. The security cameras at a light fitness gym had recorded him working out from 8:45 p.m. to 10:00 p.m. He had bought a protein shake at the convenience store afterward, making sure to chat with the cashier. The receipt was still in his wallet. 10:17 p.m. Meanwhile, Tommy Parker sat silent at the breakfast table, pushing his cereal around in circles. He hadn't slept all night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grandpa Chess falling, heard that terrible splash in the dark water. "Tommy, are you feeling sick?" his mother asked, pressing her hand to his forehead. "You're very pale." He shook his head, unable to find words. How could he tell her what he had seen? Would Mr. Suit come after him too if he knew Tommy had been watching? The morning news interrupted their breakfast. Breaking news. Local businessman Harold Blackwood was found dead in the river this morning. Police suspect the 82-year-old man may have accidentally fallen from the old stone bridge in Riverside Park. Tommy's spoon clattered against his bowl. His mother turned up the volume as pictures of Grandpa Chess appeared on the screen. Harold in a business suit, Harold receiving an award, Harold smiling at some charity event. Across town, Marcus watched the same news report from his office. He had chosen his clothes carefully today, a dark blue suit that conveyed respect and sadness. When the police called, as he knew they would, he needed to look the part of the grieving friend. The call came at 10:30 a.m. Two detectives wanted to speak with him about Harold Blackwood. Marcus agreed immediately, his voice appropriately shocked and saddened. Detective Sarah Martinez and her partner arrived at Marcus's office 20 minutes later. She noticed how perfectly organized his desk was, how every pen lined up exactly with the edge of his calendar. "We understand you were close to Mr. Blackwood," Martinez said, studying Marcus's face. "When did you last see him?" "Tuesday afternoon," Marcus replied smoothly. "Our regular chess game in the park. I was at the gym last night when," he paused, swallowing hard, "when it must have happened." In his fifth-grade classroom, Tommy couldn't focus on Ms. Robertson's math lesson. The numbers blurred on the page as his mind kept returning to the bridge. He had brought his Spider-Man notebook, but couldn't bear to open it. The last entry, about Mr. Suit and Grandpa Chess meeting at night, felt like it was burning a hole in his backpack. During lunch, his best friend Kevin noticed something was wrong. "You look sick, Tommy. Like that time you got the flu and threw up in music class." Tommy managed a weak smile but didn't eat his sandwich. He watched the other kids playing and laughing in the cafeteria, wondering how the world could seem so normal when something so terrible had happened. By afternoon, the police had interviewed Marcus's gym trainer and the convenience store cashier. His alibi seemed perfect. Detective Martinez stood at the bridge, looking down at the spot where Harold's body had been found. "Something feels off," she told her partner. Blackwood was in good health for his age. His doctor said he had no history of dizziness or balance problems. But without evidence of foul play, they could only list it as a probable accident. The medical examiner's preliminary report showed no signs of struggle, just the injuries consistent with the fall. That evening, Tommy's parents noticed he hadn't touched his dinner. "Maybe we should take him to the doctor," his father suggested. "He hasn't been himself all day." Tommy heard them talking about him, but couldn't bring himself to speak. The weight of his secret felt like it was crushing him. In his room, he took out his Spider-Man notebook and stared at the last entry. Tears fell on the page, smudging the words that now felt like they were written in another lifetime. Marcus Chen slept soundly that night, his alibi secure, his conscience quiet. But in a small bedroom across town, a 10-year-old boy lay awake, wondering if heroes existed in the real world, and if so, where they were when Grandpa Chess needed them most. 2 weeks after Harold's death, Marcus Chen couldn't stop visiting the park. He told himself it was to maintain appearances. People might expect Harold's close friend to grieve at their regular meeting spot. But deep down, something kept pulling him back to that bench, back to the bridge. Today, he sat staring at the empty space where Harold should have been, the chess set untouched in his expensive briefcase. A child's laugh made him jump. His neck snapped around, eyes searching frantically before he realized it was just a little girl on the swings. Marcus had everything he wanted now. With Harold's death ruled an accident, several of his wealthy clients had transferred their accounts to Marcus, trusting the man who had cared so much about their friend. His debt problems were disappearing, but sleep wouldn't come at night, and when it did, he heard that splash in his dreams. Across the park, Tommy Parker sat in Ms. Wilson's office, the school counselor's gentle voice washing over him like distant waves. His grades had dropped dramatically in the past 2 weeks. His teachers were worried. "Tommy, honey," Ms. Wilson said, leaning forward in her chair, "your mom tells me you're having trouble sleeping, that you wake up crying sometimes. Would you like to talk about what's bothering you?" Tommy shook his head, clutching his Spider-Man backpack closer. He hadn't written in his notebook since that night. The last entry felt like it was burning through the pages, screaming to be read, but he couldn't bear to open it. "I just don't feel good," he mumbled, the same answer he'd given everyone lately. His sister Jenny was the only one who seemed to really notice how different he was. She had tried to get him to talk during their Saturday morning cartoon time, but the words stayed stuck in his throat. After school, Tommy found himself walking to the park despite his fear. He stayed far away from his old hiding spot behind the oak tree, instead sitting on a bench near the playground. From here, you could see Mr. Suit, Marcus, sitting alone with his chess set. Marcus didn't look like the confident businessman anymore. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his hair not as perfectly combed. Tommy watched him checking his phone constantly, jumping at small noises. Was he scared someone knew his secret? Did he know Tommy had seen everything? That evening, during dinner, Tommy's sister Jenny noticed him pushing his food around his plate again. "Mom," she said suddenly, "maybe Tommy should talk to someone. Like a professional? My friend Sarah saw a therapist after her parents got divorced, and it really helped." Their parents exchanged worried looks. They had noticed the changes in their son, the nightmares, the falling grades, the way he avoided the comics he used to love. Tommy seemed to be carrying a weight too heavy for his small shoulders. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his empty apartment, a glass of whiskey in his trembling hand. He had started drinking to help him sleep, but it only made Harold's face clearer in his dreams. The old man's trust, his kindness, his stories about Martha, they haunted Marcus now. He opened his laptop, compulsively checking the news as he did every hour. No new developments in Harold's case. The police had moved on. His plan had worked perfectly. So why couldn't he stop looking over his shoulder? Why did every child in the park make his heart race? Tommy lay in bed that night, staring at his ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars made patterns in the darkness. His mom had suggested he start seeing Dr. Bennett, a child psychologist, next week. The thought made his stomach hurt. How could he talk to anyone when the words felt like rocks in his throat? He reached under his bed and pulled out the Spider-Man notebook. The pages felt heavy with their secret. In his comics, heroes always knew exactly what to do. They were never afraid, never uncertain. But Tommy didn't feel like a hero. He felt small and scared and alone. Down by the river, the old stone bridge stood silent in the moonlight. Two people carried its secret now. A man whose perfect crime was slowly destroying him from the inside, and a boy whose innocence had been shattered by what he had witnessed. Both were trapped in a web of silence, each unaware that the other was suffering just as deeply. 1 month after Harold's death, Tommy sat on his bed with his sister Jenny, their Saturday morning cartoons playing unwatched on the TV downstairs. She had brought him a new Spider-Man comic, but it lay unopened between them. Jenny watched her little brother's face carefully, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way his hands kept fidgeting with his old notebook. "Tommy," she said softly, "you know you can tell me anything, right? Even scary things. Even things you think you're not supposed to tell anyone." The words hit something deep inside Tommy's chest. Tears started falling before he could stop them. Jenny moved closer, putting her arm around his shoulders like she used to do when he had nightmares as a younger kid. "I saw something bad," Tommy whispered, his voice shaking. "Really bad, at the park." Jenny's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice calm. "What did you see, Tommy?" His hands trembled as he opened his Spider-Man notebook. The last entry stared up at them. "Mr. Suit and Grandpa Chess are meeting at night." Weird. Tommy took a deep breath and started talking. Once he started, the words wouldn't stop. He told Jenny everything, about his secret reading spot, about watching the chess games, about sneaking out that night. When he described seeing Marcus push Harold off the bridge, Jenny's face went pale, but she didn't let go of her brother. "Tommy, we have to tell Mom and Dad," she said when he finished. "And then we have to tell the police." "But what if he comes after me?" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Suit, Marcus, he looks at everyone in the park now, like he's searching for something." "He won't come near you," Jenny promised, her voice fierce with protective anger. "We won't let him." Downstairs, their parents were making breakfast when Jenny and Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway. One look at their faces made their mother put down her coffee cup. "What's wrong?" Tommy clutched his notebook tight as Jenny helped him tell the story again. Their father's face grew darker with each word. Their mother started crying when Tommy described hearing the splash in the dark water. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "I was so scared." His father pulled him into a tight hug. "You're the bravest kid I know, son. Now we're going to call the police, and you're going to tell them everything you just told us. We'll be right there with you." Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at the Parker house 30 minutes later. She sat with Tommy in the living room, his parents and Jenny nearby, as he slowly went through his story again. She paid special attention to his notebook, carefully reading his innocent observations of the chess games over the months. "You've been carrying this all alone," she said gently. "That must have been very hard." Tommy nodded, feeling lighter somehow. I thought heroes were supposed to act right away, like in my comics, but I was too scared. Sometimes being a hero means telling the truth even when it's scary, Martinez said. You're doing that right now. Across town, Marcus Chen sat in his office, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. He was reviewing Harold's old accounts, now mostly transferred to his management, when his secretary buzzed him. Mr. Chen, there are some police officers here to see you. Marcus felt his heart stop for a moment. He glanced at his window, 15 floors up, no escape there. His hands started to shake as he straightened his tie. Send them in. Detective Martinez walked in first, followed by her partner. But it was the small notebook in her hand that made Marcus's blood run cold. A child's Spider-Man notebook, filled with careful notes about chess games in the park. Mr. Chen, Martinez said, her voice hard. We need to talk about your relationship with Harold Blackwood, and specifically about the night he died. Marcus's perfect mask finally cracked. In that moment, looking at the notebook that would destroy him, he realized that his worst fear had been true all along. Someone had been watching that night. Someone had seen everything. And now, after weeks of growing paranoia, his carefully constructed alibi was about to unravel, all because of a child's simple notebook filled with truth. Detective Sarah Martinez spread Tommy's Spider-Man notebook, bank records, and surveillance photos across her desk. 3 days had passed since Tommy broke his silence, and each hour revealed new cracks in Marcus Chen's perfect story. Look at this, she told her partner, pointing to Tommy's careful notes. The boy documented every chess game for months. Times, dates, even what they wore. This kid's notebook is better than half our surveillance reports. The investigation team had set up a timeline wall, covered with photos and sticky notes. Tommy's detailed observations matched perfectly with security camera footage from the park entrances, confirming his reliability as a witness. But Marcus Chen wasn't going down easily. In the interrogation room, he sat perfectly straight in his expensive suit, his lawyer by his side. This is ridiculous, he said smoothly. You're basing a murder investigation on a child's imagination. I was at the gym that night. You verified my alibi weeks ago. Martinez smiled slightly, sliding a folder across the table. Funny thing about alibis, Mr. Chen, they're like houses of cards. Look solid until one piece falls. Inside the folder were printouts of Marcus's financial records. The detective pointed to several large transfers made shortly before Harold's death. You were in serious debt. Loan sharks, gambling websites, failed investments, but suddenly, after Harold dies, everything gets paid off. Marcus's lawyer tried to intervene, but Martinez wasn't finished. She pulled out more documents, records of similar patterns in other cities. Wealthy elderly clients who trusted Marcus, followed by suspicious accidents or sudden changes in their investment plans. Harold was different though, wasn't he? Martinez pushed. He was your biggest target yet, but then he told you about donating everything to the children's hospital. All those months of playing chess, listening to his stories, wasted. For the first time, Marcus's perfect mask slipped slightly. A tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flash of anger in his eyes. Meanwhile, Tommy sat with a police sketch artist, describing every detail he could remember about that night on the bridge. His parents watched proudly as their son answered questions with growing confidence. The moon was bright, Tommy explained, pointing to the artist's drawing. I could see their faces clearly from behind the bush. Mr. Marcus, his face looked different than during the chess games. Angry, like a scary movie villain. Back at the station, Martinez's team made another breakthrough. The convenience store's security footage from the night of the murder showed something interesting. Marcus Chen checking his watch repeatedly, his shoes wet despite the dry weather. He went to the store after the murder, Martinez realized. The gym alibi was just the middle piece. He killed Harold, then created the second half of his alibi at the store. The investigation expanded. Martinez interviewed Harold's other business associates, building a picture of how Marcus had isolated the elderly man, becoming his closest confidant. Tommy's notebook entries showed the progression. More frequent chess games, longer conversations, careful manipulation. You know what's really interesting? Martinez told her partner, reviewing the evidence. This whole thing would have been a perfect crime if not for a 10-year-old boy who likes reading in the park. They brought Marcus in for another round of questioning. This time, they had phone records showing calls between him and known loan sharks, bank statements revealing the desperate state of his finances before Harold's death, and surveillance footage from multiple angles near the park. "Your story's falling apart," Mr. Chen, Martinez said, laying out the evidence piece by piece. "We know about the other elderly clients in Phoenix and Seattle. We know about the loans. We know exactly why you needed Harold's money." Marcus maintained his composure, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair tightly. His lawyer looked increasingly worried as Martinez continued presenting evidence. In a small office down the hall, Tommy finished another interview with the prosecution team. As he left with his parents, he passed the interrogation room. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of Marcus, Mr. Suit, looking smaller somehow, less frightening than the monster from his nightmares. "You did good, kid," Detective Martinez told Tommy, walking him out. "Sometimes the biggest cases break because someone small is brave enough to tell the truth." Tommy smiled slightly, holding his Spider-Man notebook close. In his comics, justice always won in the end. Maybe, he thought, real life could work that way too sometimes. 6 months after that dark night on the bridge, Tommy Parker stood with his family outside the courthouse. The morning sun felt warm on his face as Detective Martinez approached them, a smile breaking across her tired face. "Guilty on all counts," she announced. 25 years to life. And thanks to the evidence we found about his other victims, he'll be facing charges in Phoenix and Seattle too." Tommy's parents hugged him tight. His sister Jenny ruffled his hair, proud tears in her eyes. The past months have been hard, testifying in court, facing Marcus Chen across the courtroom, telling his story over and over. But today, it was finally over. Inside the courthouse, Marcus sat in handcuffs, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange. His perfect mask had crumbled during the trial, especially when Tommy took the stand. The boy's simple, honest testimony had touched everyone in the courtroom. Even Marcus's own lawyer had struggled to challenge the clear truth in Tommy's words. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Marcus had said in his final statement, his voice breaking. "The debts kept growing. I thought Harold would understand. He was like a father to me. But the jury had seen through his last attempt at manipulation, just as they'd seen through his fake alibi and careful lies." Later that afternoon, Tommy visited the park for the first time since the trial began. The old stone bridge didn't seem as scary anymore. He sat on the bench where Harold and Marcus used to play chess, opening his Spider-Man notebook to a fresh page. "What are you writing?" Jenny asked, sitting beside him. "The ending," Tommy said simply. Detective Martinez said it's important to finish the story. He wrote about the trial, about Marcus's confession, about justice being served. But most importantly, he wrote about Harold, not just how he died, but how he lived. The kind old man who played chess in the park, who loved his late wife Martha, who wanted to help sick children with his fortune. A week later, Tommy and his family attended the opening ceremony of the new Harold Blackwood Children's Wing at St. Mary's Hospital. Harold's last wish had come true. His fortune would help sick children for generations to come. "Your testimony didn't just solve one crime," Detective Martinez told Tommy at the ceremony. "It helped us find 3 other victims of Marcus's schemes. You saved future victims too, ones who never even knew they were in danger." Tommy looked around the bright, cheerful hospital wing. The walls were painted with superheroes and comic book characters. A plaque near the entrance showed Harold's smiling face, with the words, "In memory of Harold Blackwood, friend, philanthropist, and champion of children." "Mom," Tommy said suddenly, "could we donate my comics to the kids here? The ones in my old collection?" He hadn't read comics since that night on the bridge, but maybe they could help other children find courage when they needed it most. His mother wiped away tears, nodding. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart." Dr. Bennett, Tommy's therapist, had helped him understand that being brave didn't mean never being scared. It meant doing the right thing even when you were terrified. Tommy wasn't having nightmares anymore. The weight of the secret was gone, replaced by something lighter, pride in telling the truth, in helping justice win. As summer turned to fall, life began returning to normal. Tommy found a new reading spot in the park, this time in plain sight on a sunny bench. His grades improved, and he started reading comics again, not just superhero stories, but all kinds. He even began writing his own stories, simple tales about ordinary people doing brave things. Marcus Chen's perfect world had crumbled completely. In his prison cell, he had time to think about the choices he'd made, about the trust he betrayed, about the lives he'd damaged in his pursuit of wealth. Sometimes he dreamed of chess games in the park, of Harold's kind smile, of the splash in the dark water. But now there was no escape from his guilt. The old stone bridge still stood in Riverside Park, but its dark secret was no longer hidden. On sunny afternoons, parents told their children about the brave boy who helped solve a crime there. Some said it was like something out of a comic book, an ordinary kid who became a real hero just by telling the truth. And in a bright hospital room, a sick child held one of Tommy's donated comics, finding courage in its pages, just as Tommy had found his own kind of courage when it mattered most.